There is something quietly profound about the way life operates. The harder we push to dictate every outcome, the more we find ourselves drained, anxious, and further from the very things we desire. We map out our days and years in careful detail, convinced that relentless effort and iron-tight control are the keys to making everything go our way. But what if the real secret runs completely counter to everything we have been told? What if the instant you release your grip, stop forcing, and begin placing genuine trust in the process, things start moving exactly the way they should? This is not a call to abandon ambition. It is an invitation to understand where your actual strength resides. The Stoic philosophers had this figured out long before modern self-help made it trendy. Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest minds to ever govern an empire, wrote extensively about the wisdom of accepting life as it comes, rather than burning energy fighting against circumstances we never had the power to change. He recognized that the war against uncontrollable things is a war you will always lose. The real arena of battle is the interior life, the disciplined, patient effort to shape your own thinking and release everything beyond that. That is the heart of what we are exploring today. It is a shift in perspective so fundamental that it can quietly transform how you chase success, how you show up in your relationships, and how much genuine peace you carry through your days. If you have been running on a treadmill of stress, feeling like your hard work keeps leading you nowhere, there is a very specific reason for that. You are likely holding on to things that were never yours to manage. This is not another surface-level conversation about positive thinking. This goes considerably deeper into how a person learns to move through the world from a place of steady confidence rather than constant fear, and how that shift alone opens doors that years of desperate striving never could. Stay with this until the end, and the way you think about getting what you want will never quite be the same. So let us begin with the first and perhaps most foundational idea, releasing your attachment to how things turn out. So much of our mental and emotional energy goes toward obsessing over results. We wait on that callback from the employer. We hope the relationship develops into what we are imagining. We lose sleep wondering whether all the effort we are pouring in will eventually pay off. We tell ourselves that if we just strain a little harder, sacrifice a little more, we can bend circumstances to match our expectations. But observe what actually happens when you live this way. The tighter you hold on to needing a specific result, the more suffocating the anxiety becomes. The work itself stops being meaningful, and your entire sense of well-being becomes hostage to something that sits largely outside your reach. That is the trap, and most people spend years inside it without ever recognizing the door out. Epictetus, the Stoic teacher who had once been a slave and understood suffering firsthand, offered a teaching that cuts right through this. He said that we do not struggle because of what happens to us, but because of our fierce attachment to what we wanted to happen instead. His counsel was not to demand that life bend to your preferences, but rather to wish that whatever unfolds does so as it should, and to find your peace inside that acceptance. The practical shift here is away from fixating on the destination and toward a wholehearted engagement with the journey itself. Your efforts, your consistency, your character, these are the things genuinely available to you. The final score is not. Think about any painter who has ever produced work that took their own breath away. When that happens, it is almost never because they stood over the canvas calculating how critics would respond. It happens when they become so absorbed in the act itself that the outcome becomes irrelevant in the moment. The result looks after itself precisely because the artist stopped trying to manage it. That dynamic is not unique to art. It plays out in professional pursuits, in friendships, in personal development. The moment you stop strangling a thing with your need for it to go a certain way, it has room to develop into something real. This becomes especially visible in how people interact with one another. You have almost certainly encountered someone whose desperation to be liked or approved of radiates off them in a way that has the opposite of the intended effect. There is a subtle but unmistakable neediness to their energy that makes people want to step back rather than step closer. Then there is the person who carries themselves with ease, who is genuinely interested without being clingy, who trusts that things will settle into their natural shape. That person draws people in effortlessly because they are not performing or grasping. They are simply present. When it comes to ambitions and career milestones, the trap deepens further. So many people have quietly decided that if they have not reached a particular benchmark by a particular age, they have somehow disqualified themselves from a fulfilling life. Life becomes a checklist measured against an imaginary clock, and every deviation from the plan registers as failure. But life is not a checklist. It is a series of unexpected turns, some of which are far better than anything you planned. Clinging rigidly to one imagined version of success means you risk walking past something genuinely extraordinary because it did not arrive in the packaging you ordered. Pause for a moment and honestly consider what you are holding too tightly right now. What expectation or outcome is quietly eating away at your sense of calm? Now sit with what it might feel like to loosen that grip, not to abandon the goal, not to stop caring, but simply to trust that you will be all right, regardless of how it plays out. That is what releasing attachment actually means. It is not indifference. It is a deeper form of confidence. In practical terms, this means building the daily habit of reminding yourself that the output is not yours to command. You command the input, your discipline, your quality of effort, your state of mind. You shift the internal script from demanding a particular outcome to trusting that whatever arrives is part of something larger than you can currently see. And you return, again and again, to the present moment, because that is the only place where anything useful ever gets done. The second thread woven through all of this is the mastery of how you think. Life is relentless. There are stretches where everything falls into place with almost suspicious ease, and there are stretches where it feels like every door is locked. What distinguishes someone who weathers the difficult seasons and comes out more capable on the other side from someone who is crushed by them is not fortune or circumstance. It is the nature of their thinking. The way your mind interprets what happens to you shapes your entire experience of reality. Leave that process unexamined, and your mind will run on autopilot, defaulting to fear and complaint. Take it seriously as a practice, and you discover that you have far more influence over your own life than you previously imagined. The critical insight here is the distinction between reacting and responding. Reacting is automatic. It is the emotional reflex that fires before you have had a chance to think. Responding is deliberate. It is the considered choice of how to engage with a situation. One of the most celebrated psychologists in American history, William James, observed that the most powerful weapon we have against the weight of stress is the simple capacity to choose one thought over another. The Stoics made this same point centuries earlier. You are not obligated to accept every thought that surfaces in your mind as though it were a verdict about reality. You are not required to let a single hard afternoon define you. You have the ability, with practice, to look at a difficult situation from a different angle and find what it is trying to teach you. Consider a moment where things at work are going badly, errors are piling up, your supervisor is frustrated, and you can feel yourself shrinking. The mind has two basic paths available in that moment. It can spiral into the story that you are fundamentally inadequate, that you will never improve, that you simply do not belong. That is the closed loop of a fixed mindset, and it achieves nothing except to make you miserable and less capable. Or the mind can tell a different story, one about learning curves, about the gap between where you are and where you are going, about the way pressure is actually building something in you that comfort never could. That is the growth mindset, and it does not make the difficulty disappear, but it transforms your relationship with it from one of defeat to one of development. The Stoics framed every hardship as an opportunity to practice virtue. Seneca wrote that difficulty does for the mind what physical labor does for the body. It builds it. Every obstacle, every humiliation, every exhausting season is in this reading a form of training. You are not being broken down, you are being made more resilient, more capable, more whole. But honesty is important here. This kind of thinking does not become automatic on its own. It requires consistent, intentional practice. The starting point is simply to notice the quality of your own inner conversation. Is the voice in your head a harsh critic, constantly cataloguing your shortcomings and predicting your failures? Or is it a coach that can acknowledge difficulty while also seeing possibility? Your mind operates like a garden in this sense. Whatever you tend grows. Plant fear and self-doubt consistently enough, and those will crowd out everything else. But shift your attention deliberately toward resilience, clarity, and the lessons embedded in difficulty, and those will take root and eventually flourish. Another essential practice is learning to anchor yourself in the present. An enormous portion of the suffering people carry has nothing to do with what is actually happening right now. It comes from guilt and regret about the past, or from dread and worry about a future that has not arrived yet. But the only moment in which you have any real agency is this one. When you feel the anxiety rising, one simple question can pull you back. What can I do right now that actually moves things forward? That question ends the spiral and puts you back in contact with the only thing that has ever been real, the present moment, and what you choose to do with it. A third and equally important truth is the wisdom of trusting that things will arrive in their own time, not on the schedule your impatience has set. Patience is perhaps the most consistently underestimated discipline there is, especially in a world that has organized itself around speed and instant gratification. You invest the effort, you do the right things, and then you wait, and nothing seems to be visibly changing, and the silence feels like failure. The culture around you has a ready diagnosis for that feeling. It tells you that if results are slow in coming, something must be wrong with your approach or your commitment. But the culture is mistaken. Life operates on rhythms that are largely indifferent to your personal timeline. Trying to force it faster does not speed anything up. It usually just introduces unnecessary turbulence. Epictetus said something that deserves to be held quietly for a while. Nothing genuinely great comes into being all at once. Think about that seriously. Anything worth having, deep wisdom, real mastery, a relationship built on trust, the kind of success that lasts, accumulates slowly, layer by layer, over a span of time that our impatience tends to resist. You cannot pull on the branches of a tree to make it taller. The growth happens underground first, out of sight, in the dark, and only reveals itself when the conditions are right. Life is like this. Picture someone who has decided to commit themselves fully to a creative pursuit. They are talented, they are dedicated, and they are working harder than almost anyone around them. But the recognition they hoped for is not arriving. At this crossroads, they face a genuine choice. They can allow frustration to convince them that the work is worthless or that they are not good enough, and they can walk away. Or they can choose to see each day of effort as preparation for something they cannot yet fully see, and they can keep going. The ones who keep going are almost always the ones who eventually look up and realize they have arrived somewhere remarkable, not because they forced it, but because they remained faithful to the process long enough for the process to produce something real. We have been so thoroughly conditioned to expect speed that slowness now registers as a sign that something is broken. Fast food, instant communication, overnight fame. These have quietly rearranged our expectations of how things should work. But the deepest forms of growth simply do not operate on that timeline. Character development, genuine skill, meaningful love, all of these unfold at their own pace, and rushing them tends to damage them. Socrates captured something essential when he suggested that the act of doing is itself a form of being. The process is not the waiting room before your real life begins. The process is your life. If you spend all of it anxiously monitoring the horizon for the moment your results finally show up, you miss the transformation that is quietly happening in you along the way. The Stoics would counsel you, when patience grows difficult, to return to what is actually within your control. You cannot command the timing. You can command whether you show up, whether you do honest and careful work, whether you remain the kind of person who is ready to receive what they have been working toward. Marcus Aurelius wrote with characteristic directness that we should accept what fate places before us and find genuine affection for the people fate places alongside us. The invitation is not to resign yourself to passivity, but to stop treating life's timing as a personal insult. If things are not yet where you wanted them to be, perhaps it is because the version of you that can truly carry them is still being built. The fourth principle shifts from the internal to the behavioral. It is the distinction between acting from desperation and acting from genuine purpose. There is an almost physical quality to desperate energy, and most people can feel it in others even when they cannot name it. When someone is chasing something from a place of fear or lack, that anxiety saturates everything they do. Their decisions are rushed and scattered. Their interactions feel strained, and the universe, as it were, responds to that frequency accordingly. Things tend to slip further away the harder they are frantically pursued. But purposeful action has a completely different texture. It is grounded, clear, and patient. It moves steadily in a direction chosen by the person's own values rather than driven by their fears. Epictetus identified the sequence clearly. First, decide who you intend to be, and then act in a manner consistent with that decision. Everything else follows from that order. When you begin from the inside out, your actions carry the weight of genuine conviction rather than the shakiness of anxiety. The contrast becomes vivid when you compare two people pursuing the same opportunity. One is operating from desperation, scattered in their approach, unsettled in their demeanor, allowing every setback to reinforce the story that they are not going to make it. Their energy is unmistakable, and it does not serve them. The other knows their own worth clearly, moves with deliberate focus, does not attach their identity to any single outcome, and brings a quality of calm confidence to every step. Everything about how they engage communicates that they are acting from a foundation of strength. The result tends to speak for itself. Aristotle wrote at length about eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing or well-being, and he located it not in the accumulation of external rewards, but in the ongoing alignment of your behavior with your deepest values. When what you do reflects who you genuinely are, there is a satisfaction to the doing itself that does not depend on the outcome. That is the Stoic ideal as well. Your virtue, your wisdom, your integrity, your care is expressed in the quality of your actions, not in whether those actions produce the specific results you were hoping for. Acting from this place makes you a better decision-maker in a very practical sense. You stop reacting to every piece of news or every person's opinion. You stop spending your energy on paths that have nothing to do with what actually matters to you. Think of the difference between an experienced chess player and someone who has just learned the rules. The beginner moves reactively, trying to put out the immediate fire in front of them, rarely thinking more than one step ahead. The experienced player is not in a hurry. They see the board as a whole. They understand that the best move now might look quiet or even sacrificial, and they trust the strategy more than they trust their momentary feelings. Living with purpose works this way. When you slow down enough to choose your moves deliberately rather than reflexively, you start playing a different game entirely. The shift begins by interrogating your own motivations with genuine honesty. Ask yourself whether the thing you are pursuing with such intensity is something you actually want, or whether it is something you are afraid of not having. Those are very different sources of energy, and they lead to very different places. Then practice the discipline of slowing down. Desperation always hurries. Purpose tends to deliberate. Give yourself the permission to think before you act, to choose your direction from a place of clarity rather than panic. And then trust that you do not need to scramble for what belongs to you. Seneca made the point that most of what we suffer exists first in our imagination, in scenarios we have constructed about futures that have not happened and may never happen. The thing you are afraid of is almost always less catastrophic than the version your anxious mind has built. You are more capable, more resilient, and more ready than you are giving yourself credit for. The fifth principle takes that even further into the territory of genuine release, specifically letting go of the need to control. If you stop and take an honest inventory of how much of your daily energy goes into attempting to manage things that are not actually yours to manage, the number is probably startling. You strategize over how other people will react. You run contingency plans for every possible thing that might go wrong. You try to engineer circumstances into precisely the shape you want. And at the end of all that effort, life still goes sideways in ways you did not anticipate, and the whole cycle begins again with you even more depleted than before. The grip, as it turns out, does not produce security. It produces exhaustion. Epictetus built the entire architecture of Stoic practice around a single foundational insight. Real freedom comes from releasing everything that lies outside the boundary of what you can actually influence. Everything beyond that boundary, other people's choices, the behavior of markets, the turning of events, the passage of time, wastes your energy when you fight it and liberates you when you accept it. The place where this shows up most painfully for most people is in their relationships. There is something deeply human about wanting the people we love to be different in some way, more understanding, more reliable, more emotionally available, more aligned with who we need them to be. We communicate that want, sometimes gently and sometimes not, and often nothing changes. That is because people are sovereign over themselves in the same way you are sovereign over yourself. You can be honest with them. You can set boundaries about what you will and will not accept. You can decide whether a relationship serves your well-being, but you cannot rewire another person's character through the sheer force of your desire for them to be different. The moment you stop trying to is often the moment the relationship either finds its natural level or you find the clarity to make a decision about it. Seneca expressed this through one of his most direct observations. Fate will carry you willingly or drag you unwillingly, but either way, it will carry you. Fighting the flow of life does not redirect it. It simply means arriving at the same destination in considerably worse shape. But moving with it, accepting what cannot be changed, while directing genuine effort toward what can, is how you travel with dignity and effectiveness. Think about preparing carefully for something important and then walking in and trying to control every variable in real time. The preparation is entirely within your power. The outcome of the conversation or evaluation or performance is not. When you have done the honest work of preparation and then release the outcome, something interesting happens. You walk in with a kind of openness that controlled, anxious people rarely experience. You are present rather than calculated, and paradoxically, you tend to perform closer to your actual capacity. The practice of releasing control begins with clear-eyed honesty about what is and is not actually within your sphere of influence. Stoic philosophy refers to this as the dichotomy of control, and it is one of the most practically useful ideas ever articulated. Pair that with genuine acceptance, not the resigned version that secretly holds resentment, but the active version that finds the lesson or the grace in whatever has arrived. And then build the kind of self-trust that allows you to face whatever comes without needing to have managed every detail in advance. You are more capable of handling the unexpected than fear has led you to believe. The sixth idea moves into territory that can sound abstract, but is in practice deeply concrete. The choice to live from abundance rather than scarcity. Look carefully at the people in your life or in the broader world who seem to attract good things, interesting work, fulfilling relationships, unexpected opportunities, without appearing to chase any of it frantically. The common thread is not luck. It is not a particular set of advantages. It is the orientation they carry toward life. They genuinely believe, at some level that shows in how they speak and move and make decisions, that there is enough. Enough opportunity, enough goodness, enough time, enough of what they need. That belief, quiet and often unexamined, shapes everything about how they engage with the world, and the world tends to respond in kind. The person who operates from scarcity is running a completely different internal program. They are measuring themselves constantly against others and always concluding that they are behind. They see the success of those around them as evidence that resources are finite and that someone else's win is their loss. They hold their ideas, their energy and their care tightly, afraid that giving too much will leave them with nothing. And the irony is that this very posture tends to produce the very shortage they are afraid of. Epictetus pointed to this with characteristic directness. Real wealth is not a question of how much you have, but of how little you need. He was not advocating for poverty of aspiration. He was pointing toward the liberation that comes from recognizing that the inner life, your capacity for wisdom, for genuine connection, for meaningful work, is not scarce. It is available right now in whatever circumstances you currently inhabit. When you stop operating from a sense of deficit, you stop making decisions from a place of fear, and your behavior begins to attract what the fearful person keeps driving away. Think about walking into a room where you know no one, and genuinely believing that you belong there, not because of status or achievement, but because you bring something real. That kind of presence invites conversation, curiosity, and connection without effort. The person operating from scarcity walks into the same room, calculating who might be useful to them, while simultaneously worrying that they are not impressive enough. And people can feel that calculation even when they cannot articulate it. William James understood this dynamic well. He observed that a human being can fundamentally change their experience of life simply by choosing to change their attitude toward it. This is not wishful thinking. It is a description of how perception works. Your brain does not passively record reality. It actively constructs it from the raw material of your expectations and assumptions. Feed it the story that there is never enough, and it will curate evidence for that story everywhere it looks. Feed it the story that opportunity is abundant and resources are available, and it will begin finding proof of that instead. Gratitude is one of the most direct pathways into this shift. Not the performative kind, not the forced recitation of things you are supposed to be thankful for, but the genuine, sometimes surprising recognition that there is more present in your life right now than your anxiety has been allowing you to see. From that recognition, action becomes easier. You take risks you would not take from scarcity because you trust that you have enough to offer and enough capacity to recover if something does not work. You connect more freely because you are not rationing your warmth. And you release attachment more naturally because you believe that what is meant for you will not miss you. The seventh and final thread ties all of this together. The practice of taking genuine, well-directed action and then releasing it, trusting the process completely without constantly digging up the seeds to check if they are growing. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from the combination of relentless effort and relentless anxiety about whether that effort is working. You do everything that seems right, and then you obsess over the result with an intensity that actually undercuts the quality of the work itself. The distinction the Stoics drew was between committed, purposeful action, the kind that comes from clarity and aligns with your actual values, and the frantic, fear-driven variety that is more about managing anxiety than about building anything real. Seneca captured it succinctly. Patient effort achieves what force and anxiety cannot. A culture that celebrates relentless hustle tends to conflate the two, treating all effort as equally virtuous. But there is a version of hard work that is wise and sustainable, and there is a version that is just a sophisticated form of panic, and they do not produce the same results. The resistance created by forcing tends to be self-defeating. Think about the way sleep works. You cannot decide to fall asleep and then execute that decision through sheer will. The harder you try, the more alert you become. The only pathway to sleep is through relaxation, through releasing the effort and trusting that what needs to happen will happen. Success, in many domains of life, operates by a similar logic. The farmer provides the best possible conditions for growth and then steps back, because the farmer understands that the actual growth is not theirs to perform. They prepare the soil carefully, plant with intention, water and tend with consistency, and then they wait. If they dug up the seeds every 3 days to check on progress, they would destroy what they planted. Trusting the process is not passive. It is a discipline in its own right. The discipline of continuing to do good work without demanding that the universe provide immediate confirmation that the work is landing. The same pattern appears in how relationships develop. Someone who needs constant reassurance, who cannot give another person any space because the uncertainty of where they stand feels unbearable. That person tends to push away the very connection they are craving. But the one who shows up genuinely, engages with warmth and care, and also maintains enough self-possession to allow things to unfold at a natural pace, that person creates the conditions for something real to develop. This is true in careers as well. At some point in the pursuit of anything worthwhile, there is a period of invisibility where you are doing the work, and the work does not appear to be producing anything. That period is not failure. That period is usually when the most important development is happening. The ones who push through that invisibility without panicking are typically the ones who emerge on the other side with something durable. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journals a line that functions almost as a complete philosophy of action. Do what you must, and let happen what happens. Not as a passive shrug, but as the deep confidence of someone who has done the honest work and genuinely trusts both the process and their own capacity to handle whatever arrives. In practical terms, this means getting clear on your direction, taking the most honest and purposeful steps available to you, and then deliberately releasing your grip on the outcome. It means building enough self-trust that uncertainty stops feeling like a threat and starts feeling like the natural condition of any worthwhile endeavor. It means remembering, as often as necessary, that the measure of a life is not found in how neatly things went according to plan, but in the quality of the person you became in the navigating of it. Everything covered here traces back to a single insight that the Stoics understood so well it shaped the way they lived. Real power does not come from controlling the world around you. It comes from mastering the world within you. The moment you shift from chasing to aligning, from forcing to flowing, from grasping to trusting, you stop fighting the current and start moving with it. That is not surrender. That is wisdom, and it was available to you all along.